Hello, this is Philip, and in this presentation, I would like to explain to you the real story behind the start of World War I. I call this story a perfect trap because it was masterfully set up by members of a secret elite in Britain in tandem with key leaders, handsomely paid diplomats, and various persons of other positions from France and Russia against Germany. This may come as quite a surprise, considering that many people, when asked, "Why did we fight in World War I?" may even respond, "To stop the Germans from taking over the world." Well, let's find out. After the Franco-Prussian War between 1870 and 1871, Germany emerges unified and grows stronger than ever. Their output of all kinds of resources such as coal and steel increases as well as their industry. So much so that where the Germans used to be reliant upon the British market, they are now starting to replace British markets in various places in the world. Germany, having just gone through an industrial revolution, has much more modern equipment, as well as better training, and the quality of German goods were proof of the fact. Their service was seen as superior, they were known to have the best customer service at the time, and were always willing to do what they needed to fit to the exact demands of the customer, whereas the British, on the other hand, had grown complacent and rigid. Now, all of this makes the British elite uncomfortable, and even quite upset with Germany. To top it off, Germany had a highly trained and disciplined army, but worst of all, to England that is, they had created a very fine naval fleet, which given more time could potentially challenge the superiority of Britain's command of the seas, which was simply not acceptable to the British elite. Now here's some charts and graphs that you can see showing how well Germany is doing versus the United States and Britain. You can see that steel production, railways, revenue, and net national product are all increasing. Even in relation to the United States, they're doing quite well, and Britain as well. So what is clear at this point in time is that Germany is really rising up in the world. They're becoming the dominant power in continental Europe. Now, when I speak of the British elite, I'm referring to a secret society started by Cecil Rhodes, of whom the country Rhodesia was named after, and whose vast wealth to this day still funds the Rhodes Scholarship. This was the scholarship created to help highly talented, but less connected, lower-class individuals reach the ranks of the elite every once in a while. At the time, the society was made up of the highest-placed individuals in Britain, including the king, who not only let them do as they wish, but played a key role in helping them out later on when it came to diplomacy. Something that a king was no longer supposed to do. However, he cleverly disguised his diplomacy with his habit of drinking, philandering, and enjoying the fine things in life, especially in France. Now, this particular elite, as mentioned before, had become displeased with the power, territory, influence, trade, and especially the navy that Germany had attained. They also had a policy what is known as the Churchill Doctrine, which was that in continental Europe, England's policy was always to destroy the largest force, and now Germany is again emerging as the largest force. And we're not talking about Winston Churchill, rather his father, who was also in the secret elite, as Churchill himself will be. So around 1880 to the early 1890s, they decided that Germany must be utterly and completely crushed. At this point in time, Britain was isolated in regards to foreign policy, and certain aspects of their military and navy were not in the best shape, as the long bloody war with the Boers had showed them. So they got to work on changing this immediately, and by 1914 they had allies and a military ready for war. Not only did they have the allies that are most present in World War I, such as France and Russia, and later the United States, and even Italy. However, they maneuvered themselves into positions where their colonies were even quite protected, such as India being protected by the Japanese naval fleet, which they pretty much endowed them with. So, by 1914, they're pretty much really set for war. So in a few amount of time, they really accomplish just an amazing amount. Worthy of great praise if it weren't such a nasty thing, for such a nasty purpose, that is, to destroy a country essentially that was rising up, and rising up not necessarily for bad. So, and if you're really interested in how they did this, how they became this army that could barely win against Dutch colonists in South Africa, to this really elite fleet, naval fleet, and also army that was just really well prepared compared to before, with all these alliances where they had before isolated themselves with their kind of warmongering policies. If you're interested in figuring this out, I would recommend reading Hidden History: The Secret Origins of the First World War, which will be displayed in the resources section at the end of this presentation, so look out for that later. So before the start of the Great War, the king in Germany, or the Kaiser Wilhelm II, was known as a man dedicated to peace and commerce. During his 25-year reign, he had never waged a war, nor had Germany been at war for almost 50 years, ever since the Franco-Prussian War. Unlike Britain, which had constantly been in wars, similar to the kind that the United States has constantly involved itself in, well, almost ever since the Federal Reserve was created. And after World War II, the Cold War was just pretty much non-stop in the Middle East. So, anyway, so America at this point in time in the past, before World War I, is in good relations with Germany. So a year before the outbreak of the war, the New York Times is praising the Kaiser of Germany. They praise him, quote unquote, "He is acclaimed everywhere as the greatest factor for peace that our time can show. It was he, we hear, who again and again threw the weight of his dominating personality, backed by the greatest military organization in the world, an organization built up by himself, into the balance for peace, wherever war clouds gathered over Europe." So many Americans, such as William H. Taft, the wealthy Carnegie, and Colonel House here, who said right before the war, actually, right before, "I live happily in the belief that your Majesty's great influence was thrown on the behalf of peace, and the broadening of the world's commerce." This was in July 1914, and this is really right before the war. And later in history, even BBC has a special commentary on his relationship with Queen Victoria, which was really quite a special relationship. And while the Queen had been alive War was out of the question. Kaiser Wilhelm was her favorite grandson, and he was by her side as she died. Now, I've done some looking around at other presentations and even some other books, not quite, aiming for the same point as the books that I was reading. And also even I remember in high school that, there were talks, it was always said that Germany was becoming really militant and racist, and they're spending a lot on armaments and the military and all kinds of things. But later on, we'll see the statistics for that just are not true. So these kinds of basically denigration of Germany and blame are not only true, but are just really pervasive. Which is quite strange considering how much proof I found, how many quotes I found that of praise for the king essentially of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and their business relations and all kinds of stuff. America was really split actually in the beginning of the war between who they even wanted to win. There are many people who are supportive in Germany. That is, of course, until some certain propaganda wars were waged. Anyway, regarding Queen Victoria, her own son Edward VII she really distrusted. She thought him devious, lecherous, and stupid. Now, she was right about everything save his stupidity. However, at the time, she pretty much left him out, tried all she could to leave him out of the affairs of government while she was alive. Basically just doing everything she can to block him from going to meetings, to cabinet meetings, to knowing what was going on at all. She pretty much wanted him staying away from the throne. However, because of this secret elite organization, various members kept him in the know and planned very much with him. And another thing about King Edward, as I mentioned, he was not stupid. In fact, the way he played his role making alliances, which of course was unlawful according to the Constitution, but it happened, he did this with great tact and deceptiveness and intelligence of a certain kind of sort, if not sociopathic. And it was well known that King Edward VII hated Germany and was instead a Francophile, and pretty much really avoided his niece, Wilhelm II, the Kaiser. And it must be remembered that the people of Germany and England had been friends and allies for many, many years. And actually the Queen, far from being a Francophile, was a Francophobe and a Germanophile, meaning she loved Germany and really praised the Kaiser and all Germany had done, and she was really proud that they had defeated France. Not to say that she was totally in the interest of Germany. She was certainly working for the interest of England as well, though. Regarding Germany and their intentions, I think there's more evidence in that right before the incident in Sarajevo, Bosnia, the English fleet visits the German naval base at Kiel. The Kaiser wears the British Admiral Navy uniform to stress his connection with the British royal family. The Kaiser praises the British Navy and asks the sailors questions. In fact, the Kaiser had really been wanting a good relationship with the British for a long time. He had wanted to be friends and allies, but the British just really kind of pushed him away. However, at this meeting in Kiel, England and Germany were settling outstanding difficulties in foreign affairs, and basically on yachts. They had gone out to sea on vehicles to celebrate, and had become more friendly than ever. In fact, had the secret elite waited much longer, and they had been keeping their own people in the dark, they would have had a much harder time ever going to war with Germany, given a couple more years of the people being kept in the dark, just really, growing closer knit to the people of Germany. So, what happened? Why would a man like the Kaiser, Wilhelm II, start World War I? Did he want to take over the world? Especially when one takes into account all the good things people have to say about him, even his past actions, and the peace proposals he writes after the war starts. On June 28, 1914, the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist secret society whom a possible connection with the British secret elite has not been ruled out, assassinates Archduke Ferdinand, the heir apparent, the supposed future emperor of Austria-Hungary. Serbia immediately celebrates this tragedy, and newspapers go into high gear writing about the death as a positive event. Austria obviously holds Serbia accountable, and Emperor Franz Joseph is furious. Germany, basically, at this point in time, is really assuming this will be a local war, as it should be understandable that there would be scores to settle after this happening. He tells the enraged Emperor Franz Joseph that he can do whatever he wants to Serbia in response. Now, it's noted that in many other, that you'll hear elsewhere, it's noted in other books and textbooks, that this is really counted against Germany, and actually is counted for them starting the war. However, as we shall see, Germany is not the only one to have given an ally a free hand. For almost a month, Austria-Hungary considers its response. Before we come to the response, let us consider the powers involved in this affair, and who has something to gain from it. First, let's consider Russia, which at this point in time is dominated by a hardline warmongering party and a minor pacifist party, while the Tsar and his cousin, the Kaiser, enjoy good relations in a past where Germany had really helped Russia. The Tsar Nicholas II both does not know all that is going on, because in his case, he was being kept in the dark too, particularly by the diplomat Alexander Izvolsky, who we'll meet later. So Nicholas just doesn't really know that it's going on, and he's kind of feeble. And as we shall see, he's not only feeble of health, but he's kind of a weak character. He's really just not the boldest of the Romanov line, not the brightest either. And he's unable to stand up to stronger personalities around him. So why does Russia have a party so interested in a war with Germany? What do they have to gain with it, with such a war? This has to do, and you can see in the map in the top right corner, with defense and trade regarding the Straits and Constantinople. For Russia to feel completely secure, it must have Constantinople in complete control over the straits. If the straits were blockaded, they can't get out to trade. They can't go out, for war. Um, they're basically locked in their own backyard as far as the sea goes in that area. So this is something that's really important to them, and they've been working for this for a while. And this is something that they can only get from war. So, as mentioned, the Russian Minister of Defense, Alexander Izvolsky. He is a self-made man of little means. By the beginning of the war, this Russian diplomat is now completely in the pocket of the secret elite. If you look him up on Wikipedia, you will find that he was mentioned as, in quotes, a Russian diplomat remembered as a major architect of Russia's alliance with Great Britain during the years leading to the outbreak of the First World War. Yes, definitely. That and much more. However, the complete story of setting the trap by the secret elite of Great Britain and its foreign friends is not the scope of this video. Once again, I have to recommend reading Hidden History, which I mentioned before, which will be shown at the bottom at the end of the presentation. One thing I will say, however, is that he helped stir up the already restless Balkan bee's nest. A nest which, years ago, Benjamin Disraeli, a really brilliant Prime Minister of England, had unbalanced. He had, during his day as Prime Minister, pressured Russia to accept a truce offered by Turkey in the Russo-Turkish War, even though Russia was winning the war. Well, they did this also by sending ships to the area to intimidate Russia and force a peace conference. Disraeli, a genius as mentioned, manages to drive a wedge between Germany and Russia over the Balkans, in that he sets up giving the Orthodox Slavic Bosnia to Austria-Hungary, which is something that Serbia never forgets. And the Russians are so upset by this, more in the short term, that they pull out from what is called the League of the Three Emperors, which was basically these three emperors had agreed to help each other out, especially in terms of communism. Communist threats were going around. In fact, King Nicholas II's father, he had seen his father literally blown to pieces by a bomb in front of him, which may be one reason he's so feeble. And so this is one reason for the League of the Three Emperors. So this is a classic divide and conquer strategy that Disraeli employed most brilliantly, of course, for notorious reasons. It could almost be said that Disraeli, as well, maybe if he didn't know it, though he certainly was trying to drive a wedge and whatnot, set the tone for this world war, or set the conditions, at least in the Balkans. And it is noted that upon Disraeli's return to England, he boasts to Queen Victoria of how he killed the League of the Three Emperors. Now, another trusted friend of the British elite is Poincaré. Now, I'm not that great at pronouncing French, so you will have to excuse me if I botch the name. And he's the French Secretary of State, at least at this time. He will later on be the President or Prime Minister. So Poincaré has not only fell under the charm of King Edward VII, but he needs no reason further than having remembered the Franco-Prussian War and the feelings of enmity and hate he has towards Germany for it, the humiliation that France faced, essentially, and the territory that they lost. So, as far as what France might want from a war that they cannot get back through means other than war, is the territory called Alsace-Lorraine. Now, you can see this is the territory represented by the yellow area. Interestingly enough, at this point in time, Alsace-Lorraine is actually pretty much considering itself German and mostly speaking German. So, times have passed. And it just so happens that the French delegation, President Raymond Poincaré, now at this point, and Minister René Viviani visits St. Petersburg, Russia, during the period after the assassination, but before Serbia is given the ultimatum by Austria-Hungary. It is here that the Russians are given a free hand by the French to back Serbia as they wish. So, similar to Germany backs Austria-Hungary, who is the one who has actually been done the wrong, the Russians are giving a free hand to back the wrongdoers, the Serbians. Now, Poincaré in Russia guarantees that they will come to Russia's aid if a war is started. During this visit, the French promised to back Russia in whatever its response, considering Serbia, may be. So you see, Germany is not the only one guilty of this accusation. But there is more. Poincaré convinces the Russian that the French in turn have the backing of the English through the word of Sir Edward Grey. English support is of utmost import, considering that if France and Russia went head-to-head with Germany, although they certainly have the numbers, they would be pretty much defenseless in terms of waterways in the sea. So, Germany would be able to, blockade them, mess with their trade, all kinds of things. So that would not be favorable to them. So having English, it just the possibility of England backing them is very exciting. So not surprisingly, a change of mood takes place in which the Russian militarists gain the upper hand in court. There is further evidence to be found in H.E. Barnes's The Genesis of the World War, in which A. British documents show that Poincaré blocked a plan for peace via direct conversation between Vienna and St. Petersburg. That would have taken place. Could have taken place. So, another very important result of the St. Petersburg visit is the conversion of René Viviani from a conciliatory attitude to one of firm bellicosity, equal to that of Poincaré himself. Now this means that the Germans pretty much lose the French and any means to talk to them, because Viviani was really their guy to talk to and to get help from. So Poincaré comes back from St. Petersburg totally convinced that war is inevitable, and indeed, this visit signaled the turning point in which the conflict was no longer just a local war, but would become a world war. So you can see that there are two sides forming, and these sides are formally known as the Triple Alliance, made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and supposedly Italy. And on the other side, there is the Triple Entente, comprised of France, Great Britain, and Russia. Another topic to be discussed is Belgium. Now, most people historians and even presentations that I've found elsewhere, or essays, basically blame Germany for starting the war by violating the neutrality of Belgium, a totally neutral country, that had nothing to do with Germany and didn't want to be involved with anything. And, you can see how that can be conveyed as a pretty bad thing and as a cause for war. However, Belgium had been making war plans with Britain. In fact, Britain and Belgium, in quotes, Britain and Belgium had been deeply involved in joint military preparations against Germany for at least 8 years. This is again from Hidden History, page 325. When the Germans invade, they find stockpiles of English make of cannonballs. Clothing, coats for British soldiers were found stashed in the Belgian palace. And when Germany, they also went to the Palace of Government, they also found these agreements with Britain and Belgium. So they found out pretty early on what was going on. Now, this is also not to mention the fact that the French used airplanes over Belgium at the start of the war without impunity in order to spy on and bomb Germany. They also Belgium was letting French troops through. Belgium would let English troops through, and of course had been training to do that for years. Something else that I find questionable about all of this is Germany's position. If you look at this map, you can see that it's terrible. Why would Germany start a war in such a position? You can see that Germany will have to fight at least 3 fronts at a time, possibly 4. Bismarck had always warned Kaiser Wilhelm II to never abandon Russia, who Germany used to be allies with. It was a very foolish decision of the Kaiser to ignore this advice and let the old treaty expire without renewal. It also led to Russia having to make alliances with other countries like France and Britain. And Germany instead created an alliance with Italy, who not only abandons Germany, but turns against them later in the war. Finally, Austria-Hungary gives Serbia a 10-point ultimatum, which they must accept. Much of Europe does not actually expect Serbia to accept it. If accepted, it would be a way out of war, however. So here's an example of one of the points that they want Serbia to accept. Eliminate from public instruction in Serbia, both as regards the teaching body and the methods of instruction, all that serves or might serve to foment propaganda against Austria-Hungary, and prevent by effective measures the cooperation of Serbian authorities in the illicit traffic in arms and explosives across the frontier, and to dismiss and severely punish those in the Serbian frontier service who assisted the authors of the Sarajevo atrocity. It must be noted that at this time, Serbia mobilizes its army to be combat ready. Now, much to everyone's surprise, on July 26th, Serbia accepts 9 out of 10 points. However, Austria-Hungary says, "You have got to accept them all." Now, Kaiser Wilhelm says to Emperor Franz Joseph, "It was capitulation of the most humiliating sort. With it disappears every reason for war. Every cause for war now falls to the ground. Kaiser tells anyone that will listen in Austria-Hungary to agree with Serbia and accept the 9 out of 10 points and accomplish them. He's basically telling his friend, don't go to war over this. It's not going to be, it's no longer fair. They've accepted pretty much everything. However, unfortunately, he does not succeed. And the next day, Austria-Hungary declares war upon Serbia. And the next day, Austria shells Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and invades it. At this point, the Kaiser is desperate. He says angrily in a telegram, "Stop in Belgrade." The Kaiser basically says, no war, don't kill anybody. This is just a show of force. I'm sure Serbia will accept now, and on this basis, I will do all I can to mediate for peace. There is evidence that at this point, even Sir Edward Grey says something similar. The very person who told France that they would back them up. So if there had been time, which the Kaiser assumes there is, which is why he's saying he's going to mediate for peace, do all that he can, there might have been time to defuse the situation. However, somebody else had a different agenda. Now this person is Churchill, Winston Churchill. We'll find him again, World War II, doing similar things. On his own initiative, against the express decision of the cabinet, Churchill sends up the entire British Navy, the largest fleet in the entire world, to Scapa Flow, right outside Germany. You'll find this omitted from other history books, yet this is the war-initiating act. And he is not the Prime Minister in World War I, so how crazy is this? And is it not interesting that this is omitted from other history books? And yet it is there, written down in history, to be found by all scholars. And there are many who notice and write down his excitement during this time, and even when war is declared, including the brilliant philosopher Bertrand Russell and the writer H.G. Wells, who was also connected with this secret society, though it seems that he later came to dislike it as he wrote down information about them, and which can be found in his book The New World Order, and there is another one as well if you look up his works. So clearly Churchill is someone that is enjoying this. Meanwhile, the Kaiser is becoming depressed and just really not knowing what to do, and also just realizing the reality of the situation. Now, a quote from another book is England, and this is by the Kaiser, England, Russia, and France have agreed among themselves to take the Austro-Serbian conflict as an excuse for waging a war of extermination against us. That is the real naked situation, slowly and cleverly set going by Edward VII. The net has suddenly been thrown down over our heads, and England sneeringly reaps the most brilliant success of her persistently prosecuted anti-German world policy, against which we have proved ourselves helpless, while she twists the noose of our political and economic destruction out of our fidelity to Austria, as we squirm isolated in the net. This is not the only thing that Kaiser Wilhelm II says like this. these are not the words of someone who wants a war. And we find words and things he said to people that are both desperate and depressed, and certainly not the words of someone who's excited about a war or even wants to start one. In fact, he sees it as a trap. So once that fleet was there, the Kaiser knew, this is it, war is finally happening. Furthermore, he learns that a million Russian troops had just been mobilized. And there's a lot of debate. Did the mobilization mean war? Kallerstrom says in How Britain Initiated Both World Wars, well, it makes it pretty damn likely. And I would agree. So he telegrams and pleads with the Tsar to stop this war, telling him only the Tsar himself has the power to stop this now, which is actually true. And the Kaiser talks of the friendships of their fathers and their grandfathers, and the aid the Germans gave to Russia in the past. The Tsar is very feeble and tries to tell the Kaiser that he had tried to avert the war. However, the Tsar is so impressed with the Kaiser's attempt, he does issue an order suspending mobilization. But the next day, the militarists induced him to the path of war. Then the irrevocable step is taken when France telegrams that it is in full support of Russia, and officially France sends troops into Belgium in the night on the 31st of July. The Kaiser's swift and genuine effort to avert war by pleading with the Tsar stand in stark contrast to the complete absence of any effort to avoid war by Poincaré. So furthermore, in this desperate mood, the Kaiser sends his first diplomat, Lichnowsky, to talk with Sir Edward Grey, in which Lichnowsky relays the message that Germany will essentially do anything to avoid war with Britain. They ask if they don't violate Belgian neutrality, will England not go to war? He suggests that the integrity of France and her colonies would be guaranteed if England would not go to war. He then asked, is there anything Germany could do to avoid war with England? Now, get this. Not only did Grey refuse to reply, but get this, he didn't even mention the interview to Parliament. And yet it is clear that had Parliament known this, they would have never gone to war on behalf of France, especially against Germany. So in a single sentence, one man could have averted a war that neither Germany nor anyone but the secret elite in Britain, as well as the elite forces and warmongering forces in France and Russia as well. But the people themselves did not want this. No one in Parliament other than Edward Grey, Asquith, and Churchill were any bit excited about this. They were all ashen-faced. So, one thing that is said, in the words of Rudolf Steiner, a single sentence, and the war in the West would have never taken place. History will one day show that the neutrality of Belgium would never have been violated if Sir Edward Grey had made the declaration that it would be quite easy for him to make. Now in England, Parliament is summoned, followed by a stirring speech by Edward Grey, that they will be going to war with Germany, and that Belgium is being attacked, which actually happens the next day, Then no questions, no discussions, he just leaves in a hurry. Almost no one is happy with this, except Churchill, Asquith, and Grey. And as Earl Lorbourne says in How the War Came, when the most momentous decision of our history had to be taken, we were not free to decide. A war to which we were committed to in the dark, and Parliament found itself at 2 hours' notice, unable, had it desired, to extricate us from this fearful predicament. Now here is the chain reaction that led to the war. If anyone tells you that Germany started the war, note that all the other countries mobilized before Germany did. Italy was supposed to join the Central Powers, but instead plays a wait-and-see game. He too had been charmed by jolly King Edward VII. And this is also quite a cowardly move of Italy. Now you can see in the newspaper at the time in America that Germany is off to a terrible start, and no wonder considering that they were the least prepared. If they had planned this war, would they have been so unprepared? 5 ships are sunk. A battle is lost to the French. France invades German territory. Furthermore, this newspaper reports that Russia secretly began mobilization. It discusses Germany's attempts to make peace with Russia. It notes with quote-unquote, and they are being sarcastic here, German warlord, did not move until he was overwhelmingly convinced that Russia was preparing to strike. Austria is noted to have only been seeking justice for their murder, not war. It mentions Germany's willingness to go ahead with the Tsar's suggestions to make peace between Serbia and Austria. Yet during this discussion, Russian militarists were mobilizing the army, and it can be assumed that the Tsar was too weak to stop them. This article shows that France was the aggressor and violated German territory before Germany violated any other. French aviators flew into German territory and dropped bombs. Meanwhile, German forces were still being held back. It mentions that while Germany was willing to discuss peace, France refused to meet her even halfway. And this is not the only place it is noted. Pretty much from the beginning to end, Germany was willing to discuss peace with one party or another. Now, does this make sense? If Germany wants to start a war, or furthermore, take over the world? No, it doesn't. It must be noted quickly that at the beginning of the war, the newspapers in America are documenting things objectively. This will soon change, as American banks loan money to Britain immediately, before anything happens in the government or the public, and Britain embarks on a campaign of smearing Germany with atrocious lies, which at the end of the war, at least one honest man involved on the English side discloses. Once again, America completely loses its objectivity when America itself becomes involved in the war. Maintaining an anti-German narrative becomes extremely important given certain war crimes at the end, which even to this day is why a report such as this must be done, and why a report such as this sounds contrary to what we already know. It is also important to note that if Germany was planning to go to war, they would probably be spending more on their navy and military. Of course, we find most spending in Britain, where the elite was spreading rumors about a giant German fleet that didn't exist in reality. In fact, it was Britain with the giant fleet 4 times the size of Germany's. And ironically, these rumors are recorded in many British history books as history. But really, it was just the secret elite that needed rumors to get a pacifist party to spend money on a navy. Not just a navy, a huge navy. Not only that, you'll find people in the elite and people that they paid off, people that are in the know, are all heavily invested where they will gain from war. And you can also see from the statistics that Germany was completely outnumbered as far as manpower. Russia itself has almost 3 times the amount, and we don't know Britain's manpower at this point in time, though we do know that at least 200,000 would be ready within 7 days to land in Belgium. This was called the Expeditionary Force. So, the military strategy that the Germans used was a defensive one, called the Schlieffen Plan. Woodrow Wilson, years later, says of it, in quotes, "Now you should all appreciate, the enterprise here was the Schlieffen Plan, that if you are threatened by attack from Russia, which Germany was, you go into France, beat France, and then you can take on Russia. It was a defensive plan, the only one they had. So going into Belgium, which triggered England, was Germany's defensive war plan." This whole thing was Germany's defensive war plan, which just happened to trigger England because England, via Sir Edward Grey and the secret elite, had given France their word on their honor that they would go to war on their behalf. So who did do it? Well, I blame the secret elite and King Edward VII mainly, along with the vengeful Poincaré and the sellout Izvolsky, as well as all the militarists in all countries involved, including Serbia. However, the wars that the British were involved in before the war were non-stop and awful brutal, like the Boer Wars, whereas the Kaiser's reputation was spotless. So once again, this is really just pointing the finger at secret elite and Britain. Must also mention quickly that I blame the Federal Reserve as well, for the war likely would have reached a truce much earlier, as mentioned in Prolonging the Agony and the Genesis of the World War. Banks involved essentially profited on death, as they have continued to do until the present. For before America even entered the war, Britain was completely not only broke, but in debt, just over in debt. They had actually just spent way too much. Now here you can see some of the propaganda on behalf of the British and the French that shaped public opinion and which in turn affects how we still view things today. In the book How the Madness Was Engineered, revealed how French artists manufactured casts of such exhibits as mutilated French and Belgian children. They also used pictures from horrible pogroms against the Jews in Poland that were taken before the war, used to tell stories blaming Germany for all kinds of horrors. Interestingly, President Wilson, as well as the Ambassador Page, are also somewhat to blame. For Ambassador Page had given the British the entire time basically confidence that America would enter the war on their behalf if the war started to go against them, which at one point it did. So, had that not happened, it's very likely that the British would have accepted the peace proposals at the end of 1916 by Germany that would have ended the war without anyone gaining or losing anything, despite Germany's advantage at the time. Of course, men would have been lost, lives. But that's not important to countries, unfortunately. Furthermore, it must be noted that Lusitania playing a role in bringing America to the war was very deliberate. Not to sound like it's a conspiracy, for it's actually fact, that Lusitania was registered as a munitions cargo ship, and they were also in German territory. And once the Lusitania had been sunk, the Germans were so horrified that they ended submarine warfare for a while. Only when it was recontinued, because they had to, essentially, it was when Wilson, after having been re-elected for keeping the United States out of the war, now not having to worry about re-election, sided with the neocons of the day and used the recontinuation of submarine warfare as an excuse for going to war. And this is also because Wilson was quite an Anglophile, and he was very much predisposed to favor the British. Now, throughout the war, from the very beginning to the end, Kaiser Wilhelm II was continuously offering peace proposals. Unfortunately, France, England, and the American foreign ambassador, British puppet Page, did not let President Wilson know the full extent of all the proposals. Furthermore, Ambassador Page told England they would have their back, which, as mentioned, kept them fighting. Had President Wilson known the genuine desire of the Kaiser to end the war, or chosen a better ambassador, he would not have gotten America involved, and would have pushed even harder on England to accept various peace offers, which probably would have been accepted, because Germany at one point was actually winning, despite all odds. Furthermore, President Wilson's peace plans were continuously refused by the Allies, not even being bothered half the time to be passed to the Germans, who obviously wanted to accept them. Finally, the German army surrenders, perhaps thinking Wilson's plan will be enacted, which was actually fair. Furthermore, before the Germans surrender, although they were not in a position to win, they were still in a position to potentially not lose. However, Germany also suffered internal issues: communism, strikes, and betrayal by the political class, as Honorable Wilhelm was no longer calling the shots. So, only after they surrendered, the unfair conditions offered to Germany, which they continuously do not accept, and in order to get them to submit, England and the Allies essentially starved the Germans into submission, into even accepting that they started the war. The plan that aimed, as Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty in 1914 and one of the framers of the scheme, admitted to starve the whole population, men, women, and children, old and young, wounded and sound, into submission. So finally Germany is done in. At this point in time, at least 800,000 women, children, and elderly died during the blockade, from mostly starvation. This atrocity is likely one of the reasons that the mainstream narrative has still not changed to completely represent the truth. Furthermore, the fact that Germany accepted responsibility because they had to, when they first came to this quote-unquote, treaty or truce, they were just astounded and walked out in anger. The terms were just awful. The terms, or the Versailles Treaty, was extremely severe and set the preconditions for another war, partitioning the German people into many countries where they are often mistreated, such as in Poland, which will be a direct cause for World War II later on. The French as well take advantage of a militarily naked Germany to occupy the Ruhr in 1923, and mistreat hungry civilians. At this point, Wilson knows a bit, definitely learned a bit what actually happened, and says, I would like to see Germany clean up France, and I should like to see Jusserand, the French leader at the time, and tell him so to his face. Now, one thing that President Wilson had said that is too bad that was not followed, and is quite wise, is that the only possible peace was peace without victory. Peace without victory. Now that would have been a way to avoid a further war, as well as the starvations and continual slaughter. Now, if there's not enough evidence already that Germany did not start the war, it is essential to see that this horrible war brought very little change to the way that the British engaged in war after war after war. So too the French. The way they did it was not very pretty either. In Syria, the same thing is repeated. For less reason than Germany had to invade Belgium, France reduces Damascus to rubble. In Morocco, the French bomb non-combatants for no reason, just to traumatize them and do it for the psychological warfare. And Churchill, regarding the Kurds in present-day Iraq, back then, however, in 1920, says, I am strongly in favor of using poison gas against the uncivilized tribes. It would spread a lively terror. Now, if that isn't sick, I don't know what is. The end. Now, if there's one thing I can quote at the end here, it is a passage by E.D. Morrill in his book Truth and the War from 1916. Those dreadful fields of senseless carnage. It came therefore to this, while negative assurances had been given to the House of Commons, positive acts diametrically opposed to these assurances had been concerted by the War Office and the Admiralty with the authority of the Foreign Office. All the obligations of an alliance had been incurred, but incurred by the most dangerous and subtle methods, incurred in such a way as to leave the Cabinet free to deny the existence of any formal parchment recording them, and free to represent its policy at home and abroad as one of contractual detachment from the rival continental groups. The end. I hope you like this, and I would like you to feel free to leave comments below or questions, criticism, and I actually hope to be doing more videos like this. Thank you. Thank you for listening.